Nick De La Torre joining us from GatorsOnline's.com. I think we talked to Nick last year on the show as well. So, Nick, welcome back, man. How you doing?
Doing well. Thank you guys for having me. And, man, I think we've been having Chris on podcast since I was at Gator Country like in 2013. So always down to return the favor.
Definitely, man. We've all been doing this for a while now, it appears. We've all seen a lot. So tell the Gamecock fans on here, big picture view. What do they need to know about this Florida team before we dive in? Maybe if they haven't watched much of Florida at all, give us kind of that big picture view on what this Florida team's been all about so far.
Yeah, it's kind of Florida goes as Anthony Richardson does. And at times he's been great. Had a game against Utah where people were like, oh, man, we forgot to add someone to the Heisman watch list. And then had games against teams like Kentucky and USF where it looks like a totally different person. Florida's kind of found its footing with running backs Montreal Johnson and Trevor Etienne. So it doesn't all fall on Anthony's shoulders. In the beginning, they were really trying to throw the ball more and had a different running back starting. So they're really finding their footing with the running game. And then defensively, I said, Dan Mullen didn't leave the cupboard bare on the defensive line, but there weren't enough dishes and plates to have a dinner party because you really just had a bunch of 5-star, 4-star, former 5-star, 4-star guys, and then no one behind them. But through 9 games, 10 weeks into the season, you have that depth starting to develop. So Florida in the first 2-3 games had defensive tackles playing 68 snaps, and I don't know how a guy that weighs 320 pounds can make it through a game 68 snaps. But they're starting to get some more depth there. So Florida's been a team that I think before the season I had them pegged at 7-5, 8-4. When they started 2-2 and almost losing to USF, I thought, oh man, this team might not get bowl eligible. But I think overall they've been kind of what we expected them to be with the depth issues they've had because of the recruiting in the past and a quarterback who's only really started 5-6 games. I guess now started 10 games now, 1 last year and 9 this year. There were some growing pains to be expected.
Nick, let's start on the defensive line there. You mentioned the lack of depth, and obviously Florida was dealt a blow of some sort when Brenton Cox was apparently dismissed from the team after the Georgia game. He was a starter for them. We all know he was a former big-time recruit, seemed to be one of their top pass rushers. How has that affected things? I know we don't have a huge sample size. We have, 1 game? But how has that affected the depth and maybe the production up front for the Gators?
Well, that was one position that Florida really had a bunch of depth at. Antoine Powell-Randall, who replaced him, had 2 sacks and a forced fumble against Texas A&M. And I think it's almost addition by subtraction. Brenton Cox always seemed to be more concerned about him than the Gators. Always concerned about how many sacks did I get, how many tackles for loss. I'm the best pass rusher in the NFL, and I have to show it, and really worried about his draft stock. And listen, if I were 20 years old and good enough at football that people are going to pay me millions of dollars to do it one day, I'd probably worry about that stuff too. But Florida's really didn't miss him at all against Texas A&M. Princely Umamilan, that's a fun one. Princely kind of moved over. He's a defensive end, but kind of moved over to that jack linebacker position on third down passing situations. So Florida has a lot of pass rushers, Justice Boone, Princely, Lloyd Summerall, Antoine Powell-Randall. So if they could afford, obviously you don't want to lose someone, but if you could afford to, that's a position that, wasn't going to hurt Florida too much.
Nick, let's talk a little bit more about Anthony Richardson. Obviously, as you said in the open, this Florida team has sort of gone as far as he can take them from game to game. It does seem like he's protected the football a little bit better lately, that they've played much better lately. I guess, how do I ask this? What are the differences in his play when it's good or when it's not good? And it seems like when it's good, it's probably a couple of notches above that. He's shown he can be spectacular when when he's at his best.
Yeah, and Florida fans come after me when I say this, but Anthony Richardson has the potential to. Florida has the potential to win any game that Anthony Richardson is playing. He has, he could be the answer to what if Cam Newton never stole a laptop at Florida. Like he has that kind of ceiling. He can be that good. I think he gets in his own way at times. I remember talking to him shortly after the Kentucky game, and he's thinking in that Kentucky game about, well, I'm going up against Will Levis, and there's 15 NFL scouts here. I need to show them that I can throw the ball better than Will Levis. And you want to shake him and be like, listen, Will Levis cannot ever be 6'4", 240 and run 21 miles an hour. So you're taking away the best parts of your game because you think this is what people want to see. They want to see you be Anthony Richardson. So I think he's almost been his worst enemy at times this year. Just thinking too much. And I'm like, hey, you can think about that, but don't think about that when you're getting the snap or when you're getting the play call from the sideline. That's that 3-hour time window is when you need to not think about anything like that. So he has the potential to be a Heisman winner. He's just a rare special talent as a passer. He's just raw still. And we've seen it since the spring. His miss is high, and if you miss low, normally it'll be incomplete. But when you start missing high, especially when you throw the ball over the middle, that's when you get some interceptions. He's had 7 of those this year. The last 3 weeks, he hasn't had a turnover, which are the only 3 weeks he hasn't had a turnover. So I think you're kind of seeing him start to get comfortable and kind of maybe turn that corner a little bit. But for a while, it was just he's going to run for 2 touchdowns and he's going to fumble the ball once and cough it up and throw an interception. It was almost like things were canceling each other out the first month and a half of the season.
When you look, Nick, at the Florida run game, has it improved some also in the past 3 weeks? In addition to Anthony himself taking better care of the football, has the run game for Florida been complementary to that? We know Anthony can run the ball, right? But with Johnson, with ETN, has that aspect also gotten better the past 3 weeks? And then how do you feel they match up in the run game against a South Carolina team that's shown some deficiencies there on defense?
Yeah, well, Florida, I don't know if I've ever been able to say this in the 10 years I've been covering. Florida's offensive line has been really good. And I think, we started the podcast I was on, started selling shirts that said, RTDB, run the dang ball. We thought it was Florida's strength, and they kind of like threw. And I get you don't want to make yourself one-dimensional, but with the strength of Florida, you've got a quarterback who will make you play 11 on 11 because he can run. And then you've got really 4 running backs that are all really capable, and they've settled on 2, Johnson and ETN. But Florida, outside of Georgia, has been able to run on pretty much everybody this year. And when they run for 200 yards, I think they are 4-1 this year. The one loss coming to LSU at home, and they ran for 210. And when they don't run for 200, they have not won a game yet. So it seems pretty clear the recipe for success for Florida, at least for this season. And they're certainly capable to run. And when I look at South Carolina, Florida's actually a worse run defense than South Carolina this year. But when I look at South Carolina and I see what Vanderbilt was able to do last week, and I don't know if that's an outlier or if that's how the run defense is, I look at Florida and I think, okay, if you throw the ball more than 15 times this week, you're stupid.
Yeah, and I think, Nick, to give you the perspective to that from our side, this is a team that really struggled to stop the run last year. There were like some real signs of progress at times this year, I think. And then you look at the last 2 weeks and, the way Missouri was able to run the ball on Carolina as well, an offense with Missouri that had not been very good at all coming into those games. I think very, very concerning for South Carolina from that perspective. Not probably they'd love for it to be an outlier, but it really is not. So, we're looking at it the same way, saying Florida really should run the ball just about I know coaches are going to say they need balance and all that stuff. They should probably run the ball just about every play as long as they can stay ahead of the sticks as far as down and distance. How much do they run Richardson designed run stuff, and how much of it is more just the course of a game? He ends up just athleticism taking over, drops back, extends a play, and all there's 6 carries just because that's what was available on a given play.
It's hard to say. They do a ton of RPO, and fans have been angry because Richardson has almost seemed to always pass in that situation. They've also they haven't done a lot of like read option stuff, but Anthony hasn't really been great when they have designed quarterback draws or designed quarterback runs. He almost is better when the play breaks down, and that's when he really, really has made people pay. I think he went the wrong way on his 60-yard touchdown run, and that was a scramble. Last week, he had an 80-yard touchdown run earlier in the year, and that was a play that just broke down. So yes, they will call design runs for him, but he hasn't been as great or as good as he has been when things break down and he's kind of freestyling.
Nick, let's move over to defense. Not that we have to be done with Anthony Richardson or offense, but just wanted to make sure I got this in defensively. Florida statistically has not been great. Now, part of that, obviously, they just in the past 3 weeks, they played Georgia and they played LSU. And those are 2 of the better teams in the country, of course. But what have you seen from this Florida defense where, kind of what's the good, what's the bad, what's the ugly, if any?
The ugly certainly was 21 missed tackles against LSU. The good, I think Florida's linebackers against Florida's linebacker in particular, Amari Burney. I think everyone knows Ventura Miller and the player that he is. He's in his 6th year, so not new. But Amari Burney's had probably his best year at Florida in his 5th season with the Gators. The biggest deficiency for Florida is covering tight ends. Now, listen, Brant Keithy, who's now injured at Utah, he's going to be playing on Sundays. Brock Bowers might be the best player in the country. Those 2 guys torched Florida. Florida doesn't really have if you have a big athletic tight end, Florida really doesn't have an answer for that. So they've been exposed a little bit. As good as I think Ventura Miller and Amari Burney are as linebackers, they're going to be 2 down linebackers in the NFL. They're not very good in coverage. So there's some ways to attack Florida. And listen, we're sitting here in November. You are what you are. Like what's on film is what you have. You're not hiding anything. I said that before the Georgia game, and Georgia threw to Bowers and threw to Washington all day, all afternoon. So there's not much Florida can do if you're able to attack that.
Yeah, certainly will be something to keep an eye on this week. South Carolina obviously has Jaheim Bell, but Jaheim Bell having to play more of a running back role, at least last week, because Marshawn Lloyd was out. So let's talk game flow. I always like the conversation of, how do we feel like this game's going to play out? How many points is it going to take to win this game? Carolina had a few there in a row where it just seemed like they were going to be more low-scoring slugfests. I look at this, looking at Florida's running game and Carolina's run defense, saying, I think Florida can score points in this game. I think Carolina, if they're going to have a chance, is going to have to match it or force turnovers, which is something Florida has not done as of late. Nick, how do you sort of see this game playing out from like a game flow / keys to victory type standpoint?
Yeah, I'd be. It's senior day for Florida, last home game. I'd be surprised if Florida didn't score 30. And I think you're right on with that, Wes. I don't think that South Carolina can muddy up and dirty up the game enough to make it a 20-17 kind of game, unless they're forcing a ton of turnovers. So I think Florida should be able to score in the 30s, right around 30. And if South Carolina is going to win the game, I think they're going to have to, like you said, keep up with that. And but I've seen many Florida teams this year. Florida could also go out there and turn the ball over 5 times and score 14. They've made me look silly and uneducated many times this year. So you don't know when you're covering the Gators.
Definitely. Hey, man, great insight, great info. Appreciate you making the time as always. We'll return the favor tomorrow and join y'all's podcast. How has that been, by the way? Those listening probably don't know, but y'all do it from Spurrier's Restaurant. Is that right?
Yeah. They just had their 1-year anniversary earlier this year. They have fantastic cookies, which are Jerry's recipe. I don't think Jerry's back there in the kitchen making them, but it's supposedly her recipe. There's a bunch of if you're a South Carolina fan, you're coming down in. I would say this: it's essentially a Steve Spurrier museum with some good food. But Jerry was probably happy they opened it because every bowl game watch that he got is up on the wall, and visors and hats. There's South Carolina memorabilia, Florida memorabilia. It's a really cool environment.
I actually feel like if you're a Gamecock fan going to the game, that kind of feels like a must visit. Like I think there's been enough time now. There are still some people still ticked off about the way it ended. Y'all got to all get over that. Go check out the Spurrier Restaurant. Does Spurrier ever pop in? Like,
he's there all the time. All the time. Yeah.
Okay.
He'll get on a microphone. He's there all the time. If you're there Friday night, he will be there Friday night for sure.
I love this. This is awesome. Nick, again, man, we appreciate it. We'll let you get back to it, but maybe we'll see you and Spurrier at the Spurrier Restaurant.
All right, guys. That's my best Spurrier.
There you go. Hey, check him out, GatorsOnline.com. Y'all appreciate you, Nick.